Welcome back. This is episode number 12 of this tutorial series on Raspberry Pi for complete beginners. You can find the series playlist link in the description. And let's get started. This tutorial here is another challenge I'm giving to you, with first the explanation of what you need to do and then the step-by-step solution. Now that you have 3 LEDs and 1 push button on your circuit, let's make a slightly bigger project. So here is the result you should get for this challenge. When you start the program, as you can see here, all the LEDs are powered off. Then when you press the button, here you can see the first LED is powered on and all the other ones are powered off. If I press again, now I switch to the second LED. So I turn off the first one and all the other ones, and I turn on that one. I press again, we go to the third LED, then I press again, we go back to the first, etc. Okay? And one important thing here is that this action is only when I press on the button. Okay, when I release, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter how long I press on the button. Okay, it's just when I press on the button that we switch the LED. So that is your challenge. Now I'm gonna give you a few tips, a few help to get started. So first of all, if I go back to the previous activity, you see we have this button dot when pressed. Okay, this is going to register a function to call when the button is actually pressed. Okay, so you will follow a similar structure here. You will need to use the pause to pause the program, and before that you will register a function to call when the button is pressed. So for example, you will have to create the button and everything, and then you will do button when pressed is equal to, and you will put a function. So for example, here I'm just going to create a function named switch LED, just like that. I will write code in this later, and then you can write switch LED. Okay, and you don't put any parentheses. Once again, you don't put the parentheses because otherwise this would call the function. Here you just want to give the name of the function. All right, and one more thing is that to keep track of which LED we are actually turning on and the other ones will be turned off, we will add, here I'm going to create a variable named LED index, okay, that starts at 0. So you can use this variable to keep track of which LED is turned on. Okay, so for now we start and we start at 0 because in Python, as you already know, we start to count from 0. And in this function, in the switch LED that's called whenever you press the button, what you can do is you can turn on whichever LED corresponds to the current index, and then you can increment this index. So you can add +1, for example, so that the next time the function is called again, you can decide to turn on the next LED. All right, so with this tip, you can start thinking about designing a solution. And just to finish here, there is one thing you will need to do. So previously I have told you that you can use a variable here, a global variable, inside a function. So you can definitely read this variable, meaning that you can print it, you can read it, you can use it. But if you want to modify this variable, if I want to do LED index is equal 1, for example, this is going to give you an error, okay, when it reaches that line, because, well, when you use a global variable inside a function, you can read it, but in order to write to it, you first have to use this global keyword plus the name of the variable. So we will start our switch LED function with global LED index because we will not only read this variable, we will not only use it, but we will also modify it. All right, so I'm just gonna remove that, and this is basically the code that we will start from. So of course you need to do all the imports and initialize the LEDs and all that stuff. All right, and now you can press pause on the video, try to do the challenge by yourself, and then watch the solution. And here is the solution for this challenge. So let's get started. We will start with, so we will just ignore this code for now, and we will start with the imports and initializing the hardware. So we are going to import the GPIO0 library. So we will do from GPIO0. And what do we need? Well, we need LED and then comma button. Then I'm also going to import from signal import pause. Okay, so that's the same thing we saw in activity 5, you see, from signal import pause, so that we can actually write, I'm just gonna write it now, pause here. Okay, so we are going to register this function that will be called when the button is pressed, but then we need to pause the program so that the program stays alive, and so we can actually see this function being called. And then, well, let's see if we need the time functionality or not. Probably not, but as we don't know if we need it right now, we probably don't need to import it. So I'm just gonna keep those two imports. Then I will start to initialize my LEDs. So we have LED, well, here I can just call it LED1, for example, is equal to LED, and I will put 17. So that's gonna be our first LED. And then LED2 is equal to LED with a GPIO number 27. And the third one, LED3 with, so LED and GPIO number 22. Okay, so just as you see on the image, those are the 3 GPIOs that we use for the LEDs. Then I can initialize the button. So I'm gonna write it button like this is equal to button with uppercase and 26. All right, so we have our 4 components with our 4 GPIOs, and they are all configured here. Now the first thing I will do is I will actually power off all the LEDs. So it should be done by default, but just in case I want the LEDs to be powered off, so I'm just gonna do LED1.off and then LED2.off and then LED3.off. And at this point you might think, well, maybe it would be nice to use a list, okay? And maybe some for loops and stuff like that to optimize the code instead of writing the same code 3 times. And you are right, and that's actually what we will do in the next activity. But for now, let's keep working with this without any list. So we initialize the states for all the LEDs. We have our LED index, so we will start at 0. Then there is this function that I need to write the code in. And then we finish the program with button.whenPressed is equal to switch LED. Okay, so whenever the button is pressed, this function is going to be called. And then we pause the program so that, well, the program can keep monitoring the button state and call this function. And when we stop the program, well, that's gonna exit from the pause. So now let's write the code inside this function. Okay, so for now, everything we've done is quite easy. That's things that we've done already before. But now, what do we write inside this function? So we have 3 LEDs. I started the LED index at 0. So let's say that the first LED will be 0, the second will be 1, and the third will be 2. Okay, so that's an index. You start to count from 0, you go from 0, 1, and 2, because we have 3 LEDs. What I can do, so the algorithm I'm gonna write is to say, well, we're gonna check which index we are right now, and depending on that index, we are going to turn on one LED only and turn off the other ones. And then we are going to increment the LED index by 1, so that the next time that we call the function again, so the next time that the user presses on the button, we can use another index, and thus we can turn on another LED. So let's write this after the global LED index here. I will need the user if, because I want to check, for example, if the LED index is equal with 2 equal sign, very important, to 0. So I will start with 0. If the LED index is 0, what do I do? Well, I will do LED1.on, then I do LED2.off, and LED3.off. Okay, I turn on only one LED, so the first one, and I turn off the 2 other LEDs. And then what do I do? What I will do is I will do LED index, so I'm still in the if, plus 1. Okay, so if you remember, plus equal 1 is going to add this value to that variable. So let's say I press on the button the first time, switch LED is going to be called. We check, is the LED index 0? Yes, because that's the current value. So we turn on the first LED, and then we say that LED index is so the same value, 0 plus 1. And note that I was talking about how to modify a variable. You need to use the global keyword here. And this is because of this line. If you try to run this code and you don't use the global, you will get an error here because you are trying to modify a global variable. So for that, you need to use the global keyword. Okay, just a tiny detail. Great, so that's gonna work for the first iteration. Okay, so if we just run the program like this, it's probably gonna work. We're gonna turn on the first LED, but then if we press again, well, nothing is gonna happen. So I'm gonna add an elif here, elif, and I'm gonna do elif LED index is equal with 2 equal sign to 1. So the first time LED index is 0, we do this, and then we do plus 1. We're gonna exit from this if and exit from this function, but then the function is going to be called again the next time the button is pressed. And the next time the button is pressed, the LED index will not be 0, it will be 1. So what do? LED1.off. So we turn off the first LED. We turn on, so LED2.on. We turn on the second LED, and we don't really need to do that, but I'm still gonna be as explicit as possible. We also turn off the third LED because it's already off, but here it's more explicit. Great, and after I do this, I will do the same thing, LED index plus 1, which means that after this, LED index will be equal to 2. And the next time we come to the switch LED, then I'm simply gonna add a elif. And actually, do I need to do an elif LED index is equal to 2? We don't really need to do that because that's gonna be the last one. And we're not gonna go after 2. So I'm just gonna put else, that's gonna work the same. LED1.off, LED2.off, and LED3.on. Okay, we turn on the third LED. So I put else because I know that if it's not 0, if it's not 1, it's gonna be 2 because there's no other value after that. We don't have any fourth LED. Okay? And one important thing to do is when we reach the last index that we want, if I don't do anything else, well, that's gonna work the first time. We're gonna turn on the first, second, and third LED, but then nothing else is gonna happen. So what we need to do is we need to go back to the first index. So in this case, I will do LED index is equal, so just 1 equal, okay, because we assign a value, is equal to 0. And the function is complete. So the first time this function is called, you're gonna go to the first part of the if. The second time, you're gonna go to the second part of the if. The third time, you're gonna go to the third part of the if. And then the fourth time, you actually go back to the first one, etc., etc. So looks like it's complete. Make sure that you have written the button when pressed is equal to switch LED without the parentheses here. Okay, make sure it's the same name. And then make sure you have the pause at the end with the parentheses because here you call the function. I'm going to run that and let's see what happens. So you can see now all LEDs are turned off. Now if I press and I release, you see the first LED is turned on. I press again, the second LED, and I press again, we have the third LED. And if I press again, we go back to the first one, etc., etc. Okay? And there's just one more thing I want to show you, is that, let's see if that works. At some point, so of course it never works when you want to show something to people, maybe, okay, you can see here what happened. So it was very quick, but what happened is that the blue LED was turned on, and then I pressed on the button, and very fast it went to the green one and the red one again, but I just pressed once, okay? So what happened here? Well, this is an issue that's actually a mechanical issue with the push button. It's not really an issue, it's just a behavior you can expect from a push button. So when you press on the button, what can happen is that the button is actually bouncing. Okay, so the mechanical part is bouncing a bit. And in some occasions, it might look like you have actually pressed on the button twice. So it's not a software bug, it's just how the hardware is, okay? And so depending how fast you read from the push button from the software, maybe you're gonna see that you press twice on the button, but actually you just press once, but the button is still physically bouncing. And so how to solve that? Well, here it's very easy with this library. You can go back to the button here. When we create the button, we need to give the GPIO, but then we can give another argument to that. So I'm gonna put a comma, and this argument is called bounce time. So you can just write bounce time like this is equal to, and let's give a value, for example, 0.05, which is 50 milliseconds. And what is this doing? Well, it's gonna say to the software that whenever we read a value from the push button, for example, if we see that the button is pressed, we're gonna ignore the next values, the next few values over the next here 50 milliseconds. And this is very convenient because over the next 50 milliseconds, that's a quite common value to use, you might have some physical bounces. So what you do is you just ignore those bounces. And it's only going to start to monitor the button again after 50 milliseconds. All right, so for the software, it's gonna prevent the bounce to happen. I mean, the bounce is still gonna happen, but it's not gonna read the bounce. And then for you as the user, well, 50 milliseconds is so fast, you won't even see it. That basically means that you could press the button 20 times per second and it would still work correctly. Okay, but now I challenge you to press the button 20 times per second. Okay, as a human, it's very difficult to do that. So, well, that's a small parenthesis. You can add this bounce time, which is going to solve the bounce issue that we have just seen previously. Alright, that's the end of this episode. If you found it useful, you will definitely like my full complete course on Raspberry Pi named Raspberry Pi for Beginners. This course contains 10 hours of hands-on video lessons. You can find the link in the description. Thank you for watching. See you in the course or in the next tutorial of the series.